Добре, тож будемо розпочинати. Будь ласочка, напишіть, хто з якої школи, скільки учнів присутні у класі, і не забудьте, щоб про вас усі знали. Тож, добрий день, вітаю учителів, учнів та батьків на Leadership Speaker Series від імені молодіжної телепрограми KONTAKT NEXT GEN на українській телемережі «Контакт», Української шкільної ради при КУК Торонто та Національної української освітньої ради КУК. Мене звати Софія Михайлюк, я є ведучою програми KONTAKT NEXT GEN і модератором сьогоднішньої зустрічі. Серію цих зустрічей ми створили для того, щоб дати українським старшокласникам можливість почути історії людей, які надихають, бачать світ по-іншому і створюють зміни у своїх громадах та поза ними. Наш гість сьогодні – Раян Бойко. Раян – продюсер, режисер, актор і засновник компанії Armistice Films Incorporated. Його місія – відкривати світові епічні, але маловідомі історії. Він створив серіал «The Camps», який подивилися глядачі у 174 країнах світу, а також документальний фільм «That Never Happened – Canada's First National Interment Operations». Цей фільм став офіційним внеском Канади до 70-ї річниці Всесвітньої декларації прав людини та був показаний у ООН у Женеві. Раян виступав у Організації Об'єднаних Націй, де говорив про роль мистецтва у зціленні історичних травм. Він також активно працював над створенням канадсько-української угоди про кіновиробництво, а його фільм про Олександра Довженка мав стати першою офіційною копродукцією між Канадою та Україною. Крім того, Раян – відомий актор і художник. Його роботи можна побачити у Канадському музеї історії, а серед його акторських ролей – участь у серіалах «Си» з Джейсоном Момоа, «Слешер», «Флешпойнт» та у фільмі «Chocolate Slam». Тож, зараз запрошую до слова Раяна Бойка. Будь ласка, якщо у вас будуть виникати якісь питання протягом його розповіді, не соромтеся піднімати руку та писати. So, Ryan, I invite you to speak. Thank you.
Дякую. Добрий ранок всім. My Ukrainian is not good enough to do this presentation in Ukrainian, so I will be doing it in English. Basically, I would say if there's anything that comes up where you have an immediate question on something that I'm talking about, feel free to raise your hand and Sophia will ask the question. I think that's the best way to do it, and then we'll have question and answer at the end. Basically, I'm going to tell you my story, how I heard about internment, why it became interesting, and how it led to an accidental journey of me ultimately becoming a subject matter expert and somebody who's very involved in ensuring that people know about the history of the internment of Ukrainians during the First World War. So when I was growing up in Saskatoon, my parents were very involved in the Ukrainian community. Every time there was an event, they wanted to go. I was going through Ukrainian school, Ukrainian dancing, any kind of Ukrainian thing. My parents wanted me to be involved, and they were very involved and very active. And I really wanted nothing to do with it. I was a young guy. I didn't have any Ukrainian speaking friends. So for me, it was just this extra task that I didn't want to do. And maybe had I put in more effort, I would be able to give this presentation in Ukrainian. But I really wanted nothing to do with the Ukrainian community. It was my parents' favorite thing to do. And so as a teenager, I was kind of rebelling against it and got a bit of a chip on my shoulder about being involved in the Ukrainian community. And that didn't really deter my father, who anytime that he was going to an event, he would be like, "Hey, Ryan, do you want to come to, I'm going to this Ukrainian event. Do you want to go?" And my entire life, I wanted to be an actor. That's all I ever wanted to do. I never had any other desire. I was 3 years old when I first realized that acting was a thing. It was a job. It was a possibility. And so I chose that I wanted to be an actor. So I was 3 years old. I was watching Superman 2 for like the 100th time. And there's this moment when Clark Kent runs down the alley and he tears open his shirt and he becomes Superman. And I said, hey, that's an actor. Somebody had told me that that's an actor called Christopher Reeve. And I said, I want to do that. So my entire life was about finding people that would allow me to act, finding different teachers, finding professors, finding people that would allow me to act in Saskatchewan. And so my dad would always say, something's coming up, this Ukrainian event is coming up. And one day he comes to me, he's like, hey, I'm going to this film at the library downtown. It's a Ukrainian film. Would you like to join me? And I said, no, I don't really want to go. It's a Ukrainian film. He said, but the filmmaker is going to be there, and it might be a cool opportunity for you to learn from a filmmaker, ask some questions, figure out how to get in front of the camera as an actor. And so he's like, so what do you think? Do you want to go? And I said, yeah, I'd love to go. And the film that we saw was called Freedom Had a Price. Is directed by Yuri Lahove. And the presentation was put on by Dr. Bogdan Kordan, who is one of the leading early researchers. He's still a leading researcher on the internment during the First World War. And I was shocked. So I went to my grade 10 high school teacher, a history teacher, and I said, can you tell us a little bit about the Ukrainian internment during the First World War? And he looked at me and he said, you mean the Japanese internment during the Second World War? And I said, no, I mean the Ukrainian internment during the First World War. And he looked at me and he said, that never happened. And little did I know that that phrase from that teacher would stick with me for the rest of my life and would inform a lot of the work that I did. And so the reason that it really stuck with me is when I was growing up, my impression of what a Ukrainian man was based upon my father's friends. So there were doctors, there were lawyers, very, very educated businessmen. The premier of Saskatchewan at the time was Ukrainian. And so for me, my understanding of what a Ukrainian man was a successful businessman, pillar of the community, someone who is always involved, and to see what their parents and grandparents had to go through in order for them to have the life that they had, and for me to have the life to choose to ignore my heritage was really an eye-opener and something that really changed a little bit of the trajectory. So that stuck with me. And I kept pursuing my career as an actor. I went to university. I got a degree in drama with a minor in English. I worked at the Shakespeare on the Saskatchewan Festival for 2 seasons. And then I became a company member at the Stratford Festival of Canada. And during my first season, we had what's called an annual general meeting. And the annual general meeting, Richard Manette, who was the artistic director of the time, he came out on stage and he said, look, I know everybody in this room has hidden talents and things that we don't know. You're not all just actors. Some of you are writers, you're performers, you're creators. Next season, we have an opportunity for a one-man play at the Studio Theater for one of you who is in this room. So if you have a play, if you have an idea, if you have something that you can create, present it to the director's office. And if we like it, we'll workshop it. And 2 of you next season will have a one-man play at the Studio Theater. So I was a young actor at Stratford. Being there was already a great accomplishment. But then the opportunity to potentially create my own play where I got to be the star at Stratford in my second season, that was something that I wasn't going to give up. So I went like, what do I know about? What do I know? What's interesting? What's something that nobody else knows? And I went, internment. So I contacted all of the leading researchers, Professor Bogdan Kordan, Professor Lubomir Litsuk. I contacted all these people and said, hey, I'm going to be writing a play and I need as much information as I can. And the reaction was quite underwhelming. Basically, I was sent a book of lists or a list of books that I could read, and that was about as far as the help went. I later learned that that's because the journey for them to get this acknowledged was often met with closed doors. So they really didn't feel like they had any support at that time and didn't feel like I would have any support either. So they were, in a way, trying to steer me away from going down this path. And so anyway, I'm not an academic. I'm an artist, but I was reading a lot of very dense Shakespearean texts at the time. So I actually read every one of the books on the list, and most of them were like university textbooks, very dry, very difficult reading. They're not the kinds of things that were easy to read. And I wrote this, well, I started to write this one-man play, and it very quickly became clear that it was far too big to be a one-man play. It was too complicated. I didn't know how I could create the characters or tell the story or put it all together and tie it up with a neat little bow. So I had a couple of meetings with the director's office, and they were interested in the subject. But ultimately, I found that it was just too much, and so I kind of put it on a shelf. It went away. I continued to work. I was working as an actor. And then in 2010, the government of Canada created an endowment fund of $10 million to the Shevchenko Foundation, created for the education of Canada's first national internment operations. And so my dad, of course, who's very plugged into the Ukrainian community, he reaches out and he's like, whatever happened to that one-man play that you were writing about the internment? I said, well, it's just too big. It needs to be a movie. Like there's just so many moving parts. There's so many things. Like it needs to be an epic feature film. And I said, it's the kind of movie that you sit down in the movie theater and you have your popcorn and you're watching and you're enjoying it. And so I get told that there is an opportunity for me to apply for a grant to make this movie. And I said, but I don't even have a script. And he said, well, you know what would be really cool is if you applied for a grant to make the script. So I looked into what was available, and there wasn't actually a grant available for me to write a script, but there was research grants available because that's something that they were familiar with at the time. So I put in an application to the foundation for, I think it was $20,000 in order for me to go and do a research trip. And what that research trip entailed was me going from Toronto to Kapuskasing, which has an internee cemetery, and then from Kapuskasing to Spirit Lake in northern Quebec, and then home. And Spirit Lake had just had a museum that had been funded. And so there was this brand new museum in northern Quebec that I could go and I could do some research and I could read some journals and go and have a look. So I put in this application for a research grant. And again, it was $20,000 and I received five. And so I was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this. And I decided that I would put the rest on my credit card. I would sleep in my car. I would do whatever I could in order to go and do this research trip so that I could then apply again to write my research into a feature film. So I did that. And it just so happened that when I was at the cemetery in Kapuskasing, there was a rededication ceremony. And there was nobody who was representing the Shevchenko Foundation at that event. So I was asked if I could speak on behalf of the Shevchenko Foundation. And so that was kind of my first public facing of being involved in this in any way. And so I went back, I wrote a grant application to put my research together and to start writing a feature film. Well, that was funded. And so I was able to work with a top screenwriter in Saskatchewan. We created a first draft of a feature film called Enemy Aliens. That was then later changed to a bunch of different. We spent a lot of time reworking that script to make it something that was excellent. And at that time, we had the foundation had spent so much money on the script that they said, like, we have to see something. So they asked if it would be possible for me to go to all of the former internment camps and film what's left. And I said, you basically want me to go and film what's called B-roll. I said, it's not interesting. No one would want to see that. No one, like, it doesn't really tell a story. But I said, but I happen to be going to the Banff World Media Festival this coming month. And the fellow who I'm going with, he happens to be an internee descendant. And his grandfather was interned during the First World War. And I said, let me go, let me take my camera. I'll spend the money, but I have an idea on how we can tell this story in a way that's interesting, in a way that is short form content, that has a beginning, middle, and end, and will be something that people want to see. And so, of course, individuals were quite skeptical and didn't know what I was going to do. And so we went out and we filmed something. And then I had the opportunity to go and present to the board what my idea was for taking that idea of going across the country to all of the camps and just really bringing it to the next level. And so I'm going to show you it's currently in season 2 of the camps, but this is actually the very first episode that we created. This was the concept that kind of really started pushing me forward in a different direction into this. So I'm going to share my screen. We did test it before. The video is a little choppy because of Zoom. And so you will all be given links after the fact that you can go and watch this. But for now, you'll be able to listen to the audio and you'll be able to see some of the images, but it might be a little bit choppy on your end.
My name is Terry Malakowski. I'm a descendant of an internee here at the Castle Mountain Internment Camp. My grandfather, his name was Wasil Poznik, and he was prisoner number 405, and he escaped on the 4th of July, 1916. And when you're coming down the road, it's like my stomach starts kind of fluttering. We can't help have some sort of a weird emotional kind of engagement with this area. You think about, my grandfather and hundreds of other guys around here. And what a lousy time they would have had. This is the image that really says it all right here. This is barbed wire. This separates it from a work camp and an internment camp. This is what keeps people from escaping, keeps people inside. It sends a message, right? That this is a place of imprisonment. It's really cruel. It's a cruel thing to do to anybody. And I'm sure there's a real sense of helplessness and hopelessness. And I think that also that he was one of the few that did do something about it. He just didn't just take it. He steel of his courage, and he did something about it. He hatched a plan to get out of here and executed it, and he did it. He got out of here. He left this place behind on his own terms instead of in a box or continued to allow himself to be a victim. he took it into his own hands, and for that, I'm immensely proud of that legacy that he left me as someone who's not just a victim, someone who didn't want to live that life of a victim. And even though he was out of the camp, he wasn't free. And that's the case for a lot of these guys.
There, so hopefully you were able to see the majority of that and got a bit of an idea. But that was the very first concept of the camps. And so when I went into the meeting, I showed them that, they loved it, and we were able to put together a budget. Our budget was a little bit more than what they had available for us, but again, we were able to work with the Shevchenko Foundation and the Internment Fund in order to create something that, you know, became quite meaningful. And so for us, it was really important to be able to do that. Sorry, I just moved something. For us, it was very important to be able to do that and create this story in a way that people would be able to see it, that it would be accessible, that each episode told a complete story of each camp. And then further to that, like I'm sure many of you have experienced this, but when I was in high school, I remember getting partnered up with people, and it would be like you'd do all of the work, and somebody would do no work, and they would get half the credit. So we looked at the average classroom size being about 31 students. So we created 33 episodes so that each student would be able to self-teach the episodes and learn about each camp, and tell the story about each camp kind of in their own words. Uh, Today it'd be like if you were making a TikTok of it, and you know, putting in your opinion, or doing a where you're watching it and stitching it for your own purposes. So I invite you to do that with my work. Feel free, go ahead, tag us in it so that we can see what you're getting out of these internment videos. I mean, because that was ultimately the point. And so we ended up going all the way across Canada and filming, but I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I wanted to have a cinematographer from Ukraine come and work with me on this. And so one of the top cinematographers is Alexander Kristolovich, and I reached out to him through Facebook, and his English wasn't great, my Ukrainian wasn't great, but somehow we were able to meet in the middle, and we got funding to bring him to Canada to work with me. Because of the way the visa worked, he came on as a creative producer rather than a cinematographer, but he ultimately did the job of a cinematographer under the visa of a creative producer. And so we worked together, and my thought was having this Ukrainian cinematographer is we were going to be able to really capture the differences between Canada and Ukraine. And what ended up happening was, rather than capturing the differences, we really captured the similarities. What does it look like in Canada when you're coming with the immigrant's eye? What are the things that are so similar that you feel like you're at home? And these were things that we were able to do. And so we went all across Canada. We went to all of the camps, and we created this series, the camps. And I'm going to show you one more episode before I move on to the documentary That Never Happened. But I'll give you a quick look at just different ways that we were able to do it. I'm not going to show you the third video. There's a link to John Boxtel, who is an artist, and the reason that I wanted to present that is it shows a completely different way of being able to tell the story of internment. So you saw John's sculpture at Castle Mountain, and so he created all of the sculptures for the internment camps that exist across the country. And so I actually have the third episode, or the third link that you have is John telling his story and why he got involved, because he's not Ukrainian. He's a Dutch Canadian, and he was very involved and very taken to the subject because of what he had experienced in his life. And so I want to make sure that you all see that episode, because it's very a different way of looking at the subject, but through somebody else's eyes. But here I'm going to get this ready and share my screen again. And here we go.
My name's Andrea Malish. I'm an internee descendant, and I've made it my mission to educate Canadians about Canada's first national internment operations of 1914 to 1920. We're here at Swansea Point, 6 Mile internment camp at Mirror Lake, and it's a really beautiful spot where families get to enjoy their resort area out on this beautiful beach. It's hard to believe that this was an internment camp. Men were sent out on the work forays, carving the mountainside, creating the roads, in particular right behind me, the mountainside that they carved out to create this highway. It was forced labor. It was really important to the province of British Columbia that this road work was done. They didn't have the money for infrastructure. They solicited the federal government to have internment camps in British Columbia. 106 of them in the internment camp operations did go mentally insane. And I think it would be a very difficult thing for anybody to be stuck in that situation and not have some play on, am I ever going to be free again? In 2010, the Canadian First World War Internment Recognition Fund launched a campaign called What's in Your Trunk across Canada, asking people to look in their trunks for documentation, anything that relates to the internment. What I didn't do was look in my own family's trunk. So we found my grandfather's passport, but amongst the passport was his Canadian citizenship paper that he received and a couple little pieces of paper that were folded up. These were our grandparents' registration cards as enemy aliens. And I was stunned. I asked my father, who's born and raised in Vernon, did you ever hear about the internment camp? Never heard about it. I said, you never heard anything from your family? Not a word. I don't know why didn't I know about it? Why wasn't it talked about? And then actually to find out later on that it actually happened to my family, I was angry. I was really angry after all that time that this can happen in this beautiful country. I'm dug in to try to help people understand that this is wrong. That's why I make this such an important part of my world, is educating others.
So hopefully you could see that the production quality went up quite significantly after that first opportunity. So what happened after this is we released this series kind of 1 week at a time. We didn't really have a budget to release it, but we released it little bit by little bit. And we managed to have this series seen in 174 countries around the world. And it's something that we were able to put on DVD, we were able to put it on YouTube and get it to a place where it can be seen and used in classrooms for people to learn about Canada's first national internment operations. And so we spent quite a lot of time and a lot of effort to do that. And what I found was when the series was fully released and we were able to take a breath, I felt like there were two things that were missing. And it was what happened to the women and children who were around when their husbands were interned, and what did they have to do? And then another question that kept coming up for me was, why should we care? Like, who cares? Who cares that this happened? It's 100 years ago. Why does it matter? And so I really wanted to answer those questions, not just for myself, but for others. Now, a lot of the research happened along the way, where I had stuff and I had filmed stuff, but I didn't quite have all of it. And we had some stories that we'd heard a little bit about, but when we were creating the camps, we were doing stuff specific to the camp. So something might come up in conversation, but we didn't really explore that. But we had enough to know where we could go and where we could look, who we could talk to. And so I went back to the Shevchenko Foundation and said, hey, I think it would be really worthwhile to really explore how we could take elements of the camps, put it together, and create a feature documentary. And so I presented what that documentary might look like on a piece of paper that's called a treatment. And that treatment is nothing at all like what the final documentary is. But I presented it in such a way that I was like, you know, we worked really hand in hand with the historians and the people who were involved in bringing internment back into the vogue. And I said, what I'd really like to do on this one is just please let me have free reign. I want to create the documentary. I want to do it my way. I don't want it to be for a specific ethnic group. I want it to be able to be something that will reach any audience, any person, anybody. And I want to make sure that I can do it in such a way that I'm happy with it and I don't feel like I'm giving any compromises, because there were some compromises artistically that I had to do while we were creating the camps. And so I didn't want any compromises. And so I was working to make that happen, and they agreed. So what we did is we just took all of the elements that we knew that we had and found the interesting people or the interesting stories that we thought might be able to help connect the dots. And so we met with Andrea again, who you just saw. We met with Kathy Bodette for a second time, whose grandmother had a whole story about how negatively her and her family were impacted by her grandfather being away. And so we were able to take these elements and put them together and really create a full story. And to be honest, when we were creating it, I thought that we were essentially creating a documentary for church basements. I would go and I would do a couple quick presentations to church basements across the country. And what ended up happening is we got a distribution partner, and it's kind of unheard of in 2017 for a documentary to have a theatrical release. But we had a theatrical release of this documentary all across Canada and the United States. It was accepted to multiple film festivals. And then at one of our screenings, there was a gentleman there from the United Nations, and our film was selected to be Canada's contribution to the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I was invited to Geneva, Switzerland. I was given an opportunity to speak at the United Nations on the importance of art and as it relates to telling history, intergenerational trauma, and non-recurrence. Basically, how do you use art to prevent this kind of thing from ever happening again? And so it was quite the whirlwind of a trip. And because of that, we were able to present the script for the feature film Enemy Aliens to the Ukrainian State Film Agency in Ukraine. And we were essentially the first non-Ukrainian production to receive funding from the Ukrainian State Film Agency. So it was a great moment. But unfortunately, we weren't able to get any Canadian funding. And the reason was Canada and Ukraine did not have a co-production treaty at the time. So I was like, well, how hard can it be to create a co-production treaty? And so I started knocking on every door that I knew. We had this piece of paper that said, you know, we have $2 million from Ukraine. We can make this movie. We just need the same amount of money from Canada, and then we can make the movie. And I had no idea that it would take 7 years to create a co-production treaty, but I was involved in that from the very beginning. And then once it got to the point where the governments were taking it seriously, we worked with them. And then the Canadian government and the government of Ukraine signed a co-production treaty in 2020-21, and it went into effect in 2022. And we put in our first application for creating the first official Ukrainian co-production on February 22nd of 2022, and we all know what happened on February 24th. So the feature film project that we were presenting to be the test pilot of the co-production treaty, that was made. However, Canada wasn't involved in the creation of that film. And we are now working towards creating Enemy Aliens actually with the former head of the Ukrainian State Film Agency. He will be working on it as a producer because he believes in the project so much. And he believes, as do I, that telling the story of Ukrainian internment in Canada during the First World War, while a war is happening in Ukraine, is a very important story to tell. So we're still working on it, but it's something that we were able to get to this point. But it all started with that grade 10 teacher saying that it never happened. And so just before I open it up to questions, I'm going to share my screen one more time and show you the trailer for the documentary.
I was told that it never happened.
I learned about how thousands of Ukrainians and other Europeans were unjustly imprisoned, not because of any wrong they had done, but only because of who they were, where they had come from.
These sites are spread all across our country, from Nanaimo, British Columbia to Amherst, Nova Scotia. This large displacement of Ukrainian Canadians from 1914 to 1920 affected our community for decades.
106 of them in the internment camp operations did go mentally insane. And I think it would be a very difficult thing for anybody to be stuck in that situation and not have some play on, am I ever going to be free again?
Imagine spending a 12-hour day in the forest, cleaning brush now, in the summer, mosquitoes, in the winter, when your clothes get wet, and there you are coming back to a camp that's barely insulated. It's really something that this story is finally coming out, and it's still having a hard time coming out. It was so well hidden.
How do you take people's hopes and dreams and the courage to come to a new country and then do that?
It is a story ultimately that is one that we need to remember. It has to be told and retold to our children and our children's children, because it is a story of rights. And we need to tell that story so that other generations will be in effect responsible for carrying on the idea that unless we are prepared to defend those rights, we may very well suffer the same fate.
So it's no longer coming soon. It's available. You can stream it for free on Amazon Prime, on Tubi. You can rent it on Apple TV. But yeah, it's available now for everyone, and it's been very successful, and it's really opened an opportunity for me to talk to people like you and kind of give my perspective of how we got here and how we're able to tell the story of Canada's first national internment operations in a way that is accessible, in a way that is interesting, in a way that isn't showing people as a victim, because there were a lot of conflicting stories about why this disappeared from Canadian history. One is that there was a lobby by those individuals who were interned that said the government should not have these documents. We didn't do anything wrong. Why do you have a record of us? I've never seen any proof to that, but that is one of the stories that we've been told. Another reason is that the government didn't want these records of each individual to be on file so that no one could ever come back and make a claim for compensation. And I believe that that's the more likely reason. And as you'll see in the documentary, Professor Lubomir Letsuk mentions it, and I've seen it myself. If you go to the Library and Archives Canada, there's a file folder that in that file folder says that these individual ledgers were destroyed so that no one could ever make a claim for compensation. So the Ukrainian community, along with all of the other affected communities, lobbied the government and said this was unjust, and there are different equations for how much money was taken and what the value of the labor was. But ultimately, the government of Canada decided that they were going to give our community a $10 million endowment, which allows people like me to create stories like this to share with people like you, who then can hopefully find something of interest in my work and in the work of others, that maybe you'll pick up the torch and you'll go find more information, or you'll talk to your parents, you'll talk to your grandparents, and you'll find out that there's some kind of history that exists in your family that you might not have known about. And you might, I'm sure that we've got at least one interning descendant here on this call. And that to me is something that's always really exciting to be able to be involved with in some way, in some small way. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
So can you hear me?
I can hear you. I hear me too.
My AirPods. So yes, thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing your story and experience with us. So let's continue with questions. So хто має якісь питання, можете, будь ласка, задавати, я оголошу, а якщо ні, то я перейду до своїх питань. Так, будь ласочка, не соромтеся, можливо, у учнів є якісь питання, пишіть, будь ласочка, у чат, або піднімайте руку та включайте камеру і питайте. So we will wait for a few questions from our students. And right now I have my question. What is the most challenging part of filmmaking for you?
I think the most challenging part of filmmaking for anyone is finding the money. Where is the money? Where does it come from? It's important to find people that have a story that you want to tell. So in this case, I knew where there was money, and I knew that there was a story that needed to be told. There's never enough money when you're making a film. Like, the technology has changed a lot even in the last 8 years since we started making this. But even with easy access, there's stuff like that you don't think of, like hotels, gas, travel, like the not glamorous stuff. All of these things, like, you've got to eat, the crew has to eat, you've got to buy batteries. Like, there's just so many different things that add up really fast. And then everybody has to get paid for their work. And then you've got to go through the whole process of putting things together. So I would say the financial aspect of creating is the most difficult. And that's why you'll see somebody who makes a movie and then they don't make another one for 10 years. It's just because it's very difficult to get that funding. And there are a lot of projects that come really close to being made and then don't get made. So you might spend 3, 4, 5 years trying to create a project and it doesn't get made. So that, I would say, is the most difficult. And then making sure that things are interesting. And so for me, it's always, would I want to watch that? Would I spend my hour and a half watching this? And if the answer is yes, then I'll make it. If the answer is sort of, then I might make it. If the answer is no, well, I'll look at something else. But I also look at why not? Why wouldn't I be interested in it? And is there something that can be changed to make me interested? And that was the question I kept asking when I was putting together That Never Happened, was, if I was somebody else who had no history of this and wasn't interested at all, would I be interested in this? And anytime the answer was no, it was why and how do we fix that? How do we change that? And I think we found a really nice balance.
Thank you. What advice would you give to young people who want to work in film or media?
In film and media, there are a couple of different ways that you can do it. But I would say, get a notebook. Number one, like early stages, get a notebook and write down ideas, and just have an idea notebook. Like, this would be a cool idea. This would be a cool idea. You don't have to go to school to learn how to do all of this stuff. We've all got these phones. They're perfectly capable. Get together your friends, go look at your idea book and start playing around. That's the first place I would start. The second way is you can go to film school. There are film schools all across the country and in the United States. You can do that, but you don't have to. Another way is you can volunteer on local productions. That's the best way to start. And then a volunteer position will lead to a PA position, which is basically the lowest position on the production. That means you're getting coffee, you're running files from one office to another, you're running around doing the little tasks that need to be done, but again, there's nothing glamorous. And then you start to meet people. And when you meet people, they'll call you for their next production and the next production. And then when you've done enough productions, you can be invited to join the unions, depending on if you're doing technical work. You can learn this all on the job, and then you can join IATSE, you can join NABET. They are organizations that will do basically all of the crew stuff. And then there's the Directors Guild of Canada, which you can work on as well. You know, there are plenty of places that do media, even if it's advertising, if it's KONTAKT. There are places where people can volunteer and start to learn, because you might start and just realize this is not a job for me. This is not something I want to do. Like, some of my days are, you know, 17 hours long, and there's nothing glamorous about that. But when everything is done, there's a lot of satisfaction. So that's my short answer.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And also we have one more question from our group chat. It's why those people were so afraid to tell their families what happened to them?
It's a great question. I wish I had the exact answer, but I think the biggest concern was that they were afraid that they would be interned again. They were afraid that the government would come and find them. Like, a lot of these people never told their families that it happened, and families didn't learn until after the people passed away. So there's a fellow who I work with. We're working to create a virtual museum called the Internment Museum of Canada. And I'm working with James Motluck, who is also a filmmaker and a internee descendant. And he picked up his camera when he found out that his grandfather had been interned during the First World War. And so for him, it was just this shock. And ultimately, through his journey, through other accounts, I know that there were a lot of people who were afraid. They were afraid that they would be rounded up again, that they would be rearrested. They were afraid that they might be sent back to Ukraine. They were afraid that their lands would be confiscated. So it was those kinds of things made people nervous and afraid to tell these kinds of stories, and didn't want anybody to know. And it also goes back to that lobbying idea, where I didn't do anything wrong, so why should I tell people that I was in a prison camp when I didn't do anything wrong?
London, Ontario, Ukrainian school, Ivan Franko, Sophia, what do you want?
I have a question. How many children passed away?
I believe this is a good question. I believe there are 8 children who passed away, but they're not all Ukrainian. So a lot of them were also guards' children who had passed away, and that's because during that time there was a scarlet fever that happened, and so some of the guards' kids passed away because they were exposed to that fever while at the camps. So I don't know the answer, but I do know that there is a woman called Lorna Myers. She is actually in one of the episodes of the camps, and she has done Project Roll Call, and she's expanded on it. And in that Project Roll Call, I believe it is now up on the Shevchenko Foundation's internment website. There's more information there about the graves. So there's 106 or 108 graves of individuals who died during the internment, and so that would say how many children. But I think it's mostly non-prisoners as far as children who passed away during that time.
Like Ontario. I wanted to say thank you for your presentation and like doing, and also I'm so sorry for what happened, and thank you for like to people who build up Canada from scrap. It means a lot.
Well, thanks. It's my pleasure.
And also 3 more questions from our group chat from grade 10, but I don't know which school is it. What role this film play in continuing seeking recognitions and reparations?
I think I think it's a visual record. I think especially documentary, I think is very important, but also story. So for example, when the war started, we had a big campaign and we sent about $100,000 worth of video camera equipment to Ukraine. That act got me sanctioned by the Russian Federation because we sent cameras and our concept was using cameras as weapons because they might be able to say that things aren't happening, but if you can record it and you can film it and you can save it and you can get it out of the country and show people, I think you're creating a record. And I think that having that record is really important, especially at a time when propaganda is really prevalent. People talk about real news being fake news. So I think that if you can create story that has as much fact as possible while also, preserving the artistic elements, I think that it goes a long way, and I think it's more important now than ever to be able to do that.
Thank you. Now I want to give Uliana Glenchak a chance to speak. She also have a question for you.
Hello, Ryan. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation on such an important topic. So I wanted to ask you a question, and also I want to combine it with a question from Paul Music Academy, which they wrote in the chat. Can you please share one of the most memorable moments during working on your project? And I also wanted to add, you did extensive research preparing for this for the documentary. But while on the job, while filming, you always find out something new. So tell us if there were any new details which you realized only when you were filming on the site, something which really stuck with you. Thank you.
That in itself could probably be a book. There are so many things that we found out, so many different things. But I think that the thing that sticks out to me the most that is interesting is it's our own little conspiracy theory. So in Fort Levy in Quebec wasn't listed as an internment camp in the 24 camps because there's a statement that says there's 24 internment camps across Canada. Well, I've personally been to 27. So those numbers are inaccurate, but that's the accepted number. So we are continuing to use that accepted number. I believe that if you're going to these locations, you should be able to track them on a map, whether it's a day camp or a road or a work foray, someplace that people went, so that you could actually follow the journey. If you're just going to the base camp, that's not telling the whole story. So that's one thing. Fort Levy is not listed as a camp, and when we were starting, we were told the only people who can say that something was a camp, other than our historians and researchers, is the Canadian military. Well, we had full access under Jason Kenney to all of the Canadian military bases. And while we were in Beauport Armory, which I'll come back to, we were asked, well, are you going to Fort Levy? And we said, no, that's not an internment camp. Why would we go? And they said, oh, yes, it was. It was an internment camp during the First World War. It held Ukrainians and Italians. And so we were like, are you sure? And they said, yeah, 100%. So we tried to get there before it closed, because it's now a National Historic Site and a museum. And we flew the drone up and stuff, but we weren't able to meet with anybody. And unfortunately, our schedule was so tight that we weren't able to go in and get further information or research from Fort Levy. But Fort Levy was an internment camp. And then when we were at Library and Archives Canada, there's a photo of Fort Levy with internees. And we know it's not from the Second World War, because in the Second World War, the internees had an orange circle on their back. and these people were just wearing civilian clothing. So we know it's World War I. It's listed as World War I. So that was something that was really interesting. But going back to the conspiracy theory at Beauport Armory, we all believe that the individual records, so there are records of the internment operations themselves, but the individual files. So had I been interned, my file no longer exists unless I have a copy in my trunk at home. But the government no longer has my file. And we believed that somebody somewhere has a copy of these files. And shortly after the Beauport Armory closed as an internment camp, for whatever reason, the cells that were in the basement were filled with sand. So we were like, well, maybe somebody took those files and put them in there, said that they're full of sand, and closed it off. Because why would you fill that with sand? It just seemed like such an interesting thing that we would love to explore, but it's probably nothing. But that's something that always sticks out for me as, like, you know, it would be really interesting to figure that out. As well as the multiple camps and multiple locations when we're sort of locked into the number 24. But I would love for that number to one day be real and go with all of the locations. And even if we said there are 24 specific main sites, and here are all the satellite sites, and this is a place that you could go where your pradida would have been busy working. So I think that that's an important step that needs to be taken.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And our last question in our leadership speaker series, if you can answer shortly, it's are you planning on making a film based on the current war?
I would love to, but I don't know what it is yet. It might be a documentary. We have a lot of footage from the start of the war, but I believe that that footage will be saved should there be a war crimes tribunal in The Hague. We have footage, but I don't know. I don't know if we'll be telling that kind of a story, but yes, I think it's important. And if there is somebody who is making a film that needs help, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for your sharing story with us today, and your work and experience are truly inspiring, and we appreciate the time you took to speak to us today. So thank you so much, and thank you for everyone. Щиро дякую всім, хто сьогодні був з нами. Дякую ще раз Раяну, і також дякую пані Оксані Левицькій, Ірині Перегінець та Уляні Глинчак за організацію, і всім вчителям та учням, які приєдналися до Leadership Speaker Series. Я, Софія Михайлюк, мала честь бути вашим модератором сьогодні. До наступних зустрічей. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Героям слава!
Героям слава!
Слава!
Довжам Українська школа імені Івана Франка. Дякуємо.
Дякуємо.
Дякуємо всім. Thank you, Ryan. It was very interesting.
My pleasure.